The information contained in this video is strictly for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or other professional advice and is not a substitute for consultation with a qualified professional. The opinions expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect the views of the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and the City University of New York. State of Mind is a web-based discussion program that explores the relevant social, economic, and political issues that are prominent at the post-secondary level of education. State of Mind is sponsored by the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. BMCC. Start here, go anywhere. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna Nadella, and this is State of Mind. Wrapping up our Let's Talk About Sex series, today's topic is about gender equality on campus. Back with us for a third time to help us better understand our topic and provide their unique perspectives are the following guests. To my left is Dr. Michael McGee, an assistant professor in the Health Education Department at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, and an adjunct professor at the Center for Human Sexuality Studies at Weiner University. Previously, Dr. McGee was Vice President for Education at Planned Parenthood Federation of America and also served as the Executive Director of the World Association for Sexual Health. He received a Master's of Education and a PhD from Weiner University and a Bachelor's from SUNY Empire State. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Next to Dr. McGee is Ms. Jennifer Baumgardner, the Executive Director and Publisher at the Feminist Press at CUNY. Ms. Baumgardner is a writer, activist, filmmaker, and lecturer whose work explores abortion, sex, bisexuality, rape, single parenthood, and women's power. She attended Lawrence University, where she helped organize Guerrilla Theater, a feminist group on campus, and started an alternative newspaper called The Other that focused on issues of women's liberation. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So I'd like to kick off today's topic with an excerpt that I was able to find recently in regards to gender equality. And I think it summed it up very well. College provides great educational opportunities for both male and female students. Decades since the women's movement started, it's easy to paint a picture of gender equality as higher education statistics do show that the majority of college and university undergraduates are women, encompassing approximately 58% nationally, and appear at the top of the honor roll more than men do. Additionally, when compared to their male counterparts, more women graduate. With that said, there are still underlying issues of academic confidence, stress and depression, and their financial future that female students face in 2014. I'd like to start on the topic of academic confidence. Research from Indiana University shows that women tend to underestimate their academic abilities more than men, especially when it comes to the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Jennifer, as a third-wave feminist, why is academic confidence still an issue for female students in 2014?
Well, you know, I think about the STEM fields that you brought up, and I think some of that is, you know, why aren't there great female guitarists, according to Rolling Stone? You know, there haven't been as many generations of women having the opportunity to noodle on a guitar, but also having the infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, basically, to noodle in a lab. So there really hasn't been the role modeling. And then the sort of atmospheric change that would make it truly comfortable for women to pursue those fields. And then the women who have, they've really had to be sort of Hillary Clinton level, you know, pathfinders. And not every person is that kind of worker. And so I think that there have been a lot of quiet barriers that have knocked women out. Because I think women enter STEM fields, this is my understanding at least, at pretty high levels. It's that they don't stay in them. There's a leaky pipeline issue.
Dr. McGee, from an academic standpoint, do we not do enough at the early levels to potentially promote and foster not just an exuberance for the STEM fields, but a platform to succeed so that they don't slowly and quietly fade out as they progress through the academic grades?
I think that's true. You know, the STEM fields have traditionally been dominated by males, and the kind of infrastructure and the organization of how those courses are built and what the criteria are for success have been oriented around male personality, male perspective, male skill sets, and I think that shift, if there is to be one, has to happen in elementary school, because it is the foundation upon which all of that later academic achievement is based. In addition to the statistics that you pointed out, now since 2002, more women than men are getting doctorate degrees as well in the United States. So it's not for lack of ambition or ability or intelligence, certainly, but I think the way that some fields have been organized has been exclusionary. And I think that's an aspect of it as well.
There's a huge maternal gap, too. So there's this moment when you're a mid-career professional as a scientist or engineer that might coincide with the end of your fertility or the time when you want to have children. And you know, men have children during that time, but they don't physically have the children, so it has an absolutely different impact on their career, their ability to meet the benchmarks they need to in order to get tenure or do the things that they need to do to progress meaningfully in those elite innovation careers, too.
Okay, so let's take this from another standpoint. If the theme and the understanding is that women tend to underestimate their abilities, it also seems that men seem to overestimate theirs. Why is that?
My take on it is that we socialize boys to be competitive from the get-go, and we don't socialize women in the same way. And so that competitiveness for achievement, I think, is a part of that structure of how the curriculum is organized around the STEM subjects. And I think that there is also there is this socialization stuff. During the break, I mentioned Amy Cuddy, who is a professor at MIT, and she's in the MBA program there, and she did a study of people who come into the class and that there is the leaky pipeline that the women drop out because the class participation is an enormous part of the grade, and they find that the guys come in, they own the space, they put their hand up, and the women typically don't take up as much space. They come in and they sit quietly, and if they raise their hand, they do it like this. You know, it's a socialized thing. It's not like the women don't have the intelligence or the capacity to succeed. It's that there is a way of being that they're taught that winds up being a barrier to success in those fields.
I see you're nodding your head, Jennifer. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, and I was thinking when you said men being overconfident in my field, which is writing, back when I was a freelance writer for magazines, it was so interesting. I consider myself very competitive and aggressive, actually, full of testosterone. But editors would say to me that they get 10 pitches from a single guy writer to one from a woman.
Really?
Because we would really make it super perfect and overwork it, and if it's half baked, not send it in. Well, I got to make it great. Whereas these male writers, and I actually admire this, and it was good for me to hear about it, would send in any sort of mediocre thing, like, okay, well, I have 15 other half-baked ideas. One of them's going to stick, But actually, when you're a freelance writer, you do have to be throwing. You have to be efficient with your time, and you have to be throwing a lot of ideas because most of them aren't going to stick.
So how much of this is nature versus nurture?
Well, I don't think much of it is nature because I think it's mostly nurture, but there's some nature. I mean, I believe in science.
The reason I say nature is, Michael brought up a good point. If men are doing the Superman pose and saying, "Look at me, hear me, I can, make myself known." How much do you agree with the whole, female being a little bit more reserved, quiet, and not necessarily speaking toe to toe?
Well, I think that's modeled for women, and I think women are punished when they don't do it, and I think men are punished when they're overly quiet or overly sensitive, and so in both cases our genders are being policed, but I think men's are being policed in a way that helps them financially or with their career.
All right. So in the same vein, if overconfidence has a correlation to a higher risk tolerance, are women generally risk averse in nature? And if so, what can they do to overcome this?
I don't know. It's hard for me to generalize about that. I mean, I don't feel like I have good knowledge about that.
Yeah, I don't, and I wonder, I mean, it is true that adolescent men, young men up to age 25, tend to take way more risks, physical risk, and die from accidental injury and homicide and, all of that because of that risk. Some of it may be the testosterone stuff, I don't know. But I think there is a lot of socially constructed performance that is a part of that overconfidence, lack of confidence. Carol Gilligan wrote this wonderful research on girls who, before puberty, were outspoken, told you exactly what they thought, were totally fine giving their opinion, and then they get to be in puberty and about 15, and all of a sudden they don't know, they lose their voice. And I think that's a social construction. And I think also, and then Carol Gilligan studied boys once she had a son. And one of the really upsetting things was that she found that by the time boys are 6, the one emotion they have learned that it's okay to express is anger. Yeah. So if that's, a pervasive reality, by the time people are in high school and in college, if that kind of builds on itself, then guys can be belligerent and whatever, and girls aren't.
Well, that's nice that you've pointed out the tragedy of what's happening to boys, though, in that policing. Even if on a short-term level, I think it has a benefit, and it does. On a long-term level, what does anger cover? It's sadness, it's pain, it's all sorts of things that boys are taught to just sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not. I mean, I have 2 sons, so I'm looking at this probably a little differently than I did before I did. But I just feel that that's incredibly negative for our society in general.
Yeah. So, Jennifer, as a strong, confident, independent woman, take me back to when you were entering college. What type of mentors did you have? What type of outlets did you have to find your voice? And how did that help you get to where you are now?
Well, I have to say I'm a big believer in being a theater geek or some other form of a geek. So a computer geek, a band geek.
Okay.
I think it allowed me to find a space where I could have a voice, where I could get a lot of attention.
Okay.
But it was positive attention, it was safe attention.
Okay.
And if you take yourself very seriously as an actor or a singer or a dancer when you're that age, you tend to stay away from alcohol and cigarettes and things like that too, because you're taking your instrument seriously and all these sorts of things. So there's an opportunity to, try on identities and stuff, which I think is a really big part of that age group, but it has a lot of boundaries and safeties to it too, and a lot of rituals to it. And so I actually think, not that I would have ended up, dead or something, but I think one thing that really saved my life and saved my self-esteem, my confidence during those transitions was the fact that I felt early on that I had some acting talent and some singing talent, and I found a space to express it. I think I see it similarly with female athletes and maybe male athletes too, but just these spaces where there's a lot of ritual and discipline, and ideally adults that are giving you affirmation. And I think that those are, I hear all the time from students too that there was one person who took them seriously, or one person who saw that they were smart, or one person who thought that they had talent, and that's all they needed to rise to the vision of that person and to continue to work past all of their fears or their sense of being meaningless or not unseen. And so I very much relate to that. And so for me it was, my dance instructor, Kathy Gasper. She was really, really strict, but I took her really seriously and she took me seriously.
Sure. Okay. Michael, as an academic, and you have students that come past your halls year after year, where does self-worth from the classroom standpoint fit in? How do you, as a teacher, a mentor, how do you make sure that's made known vocally, visually? How do you make sure that's not something that they have to figure out through the weeds, that hey, I really do think what you're doing is great, keep it up, don't stop, be who you are? How do you make sure students get that type of affirmation?
God, I wish I knew that I did that for every student, and I don't. It makes my heart hurt a little bit to admit that, but it's true. I think the investment, the feedback that I get is they're clear that I'm passionate about what I'm teaching, and I'm passionate about them. Some students are not so invested or engaged in me or the class or any of it, but those that are get a connection from me. In some of my courses, they're writing intensive, so they write drafts and so on, and I write back, and so it's a lot. It's the conversation where I do as much as I can to guide and instruct, but also give my heart. And when I'm successful at that, and I'm not always, but when I'm successful at that, I do feel that I am maybe one of the people in that student's experience that recognizes their ability and lifts them up a bit.
All right, fair enough. So let's switch topics for a second. For every conversation that romanticizes the college experience, there are just as many that speak to the stress and depression that comes from trying to balance it all. Great excerpt I was able to find was that at times the perception is that women tend to spend most of their time studying, meeting with instructors.
That was definitely not my experience as a student.
Joining student groups and doing volunteer work to spice up their resumes. Male students, on the other hand, find lots of time to join fraternities, play sports, or party for the most part. Now, I understand it's a generalization, and there are absolutely exceptions to every rule. But first and foremost, do you agree with that generalization? And if so, why does the dichotomy exist?
CUNY schools don't have frats, right? So
Right.
we're not really dealing with the Greek system
There
in
you
our
go.
current
Right.
lifestyle. And before this, I was at the new school, and they also, that wasn't the issue. You know, your questions made me immediately think about how often I had students who I really wanted to save them from themselves, meaning not because they were, I mean, sometimes because they were doing dangerous things, but often because there would be a paper that would be due,
Right.
and they would stay up all night but just not do it, and just keep torturing themselves and not do it. And I'd be like, if you had just done a draft by now, even if it wasn't very good, you would have completed that draft and you would feel so different. Just do, I don't know what, do I have to sit here with you? Just
Right.
do it. You know you're capable. And they would just keep punishing themselves until they had an incomplete. And so that to me was always that was the weird, painful thing, because I remember sort of doing that when I was in college, that it's still like a riddle. Like, how do you help that person?
Right.
Because they could just sit there, those 5 hours they spent freaking out
Yeah.
and wasting time, they could have gotten that draft, even if it was very mediocre, and they would be
Right.
way further than they are right now in terms of their own self-esteem and their sense of what they can accomplish. So it's like not at all what you asked, but it's like,
No,
what's on my
no,
mind.
this is great. And Michael, you know, in the several episodes we've had, I haven't had a chance to ask about your college experiences. From a male standpoint, how have things changed from when you were attending school to where we are now, especially as a professor in the area of sex?
I was a non-traditional student. I had another career as an actor first. I
wow.
went to drama school after high school, and that was not sort of typical college
Sure.
experience. So when I went to college, I had a full-time job and 2 small children at home, and went to school at night on the weekends at SUNY Empire State. And thank God for Empire College, because that was the only way I could have gone to school at that
Sure.
point. And then I did graduate school in my middle ages, so I didn't have sort of the typical experience. One of the things that was remarkable for me was being self-conscious about how old I was throughout, and that some people looked to me as the old wise guy, you know, and so I was self-conscious about holding back,
Right.
and not jumping in because I knew a lot. I could have been teaching some of those courses, so I was very self-conscious about holding back. I mean, being present and
Sure.
authentic, but not too much
Fair enough.
doing that.
So let me take it from a different perspective. And this is something that I think there's a general acceptance of. Why is it that men typically take the stance, and the perception is that they'll figure it out as they go, but women need to be on top of everything all the time, 24/7?
That's a good question. I don't know. What do you think?
I can talk to my own experiences,
Yeah.
and I will absolutely say there's truth to that. Not to disclose too much personal information,
Yeah.
but my wife is a practicing emergency room psychiatrist, and for her, it's all about making sure everything's taken care of at that moment, at that time. For myself, it's going to happen sometime in the future. I'll worry about it then, because I have things before then that I need to take care of. No sense living in the future when I'd rather live in the present, because it goes back to that risk aspect. I'll deal with what's most important now, because that's the most prevalent to my life. The things in the future I have no control over, and I'll deal with them when I have to.
I think that's a personality thing rather than a gender thing. I think you and your wife have different, and sounds like complementary personalities. But I think a lot of women live in the moment for right here and now, and take care of what they can take care of now, and tomorrow will, and others want to well, next week we will and do all the planning. I mean, I don't know that it's a gendered sort of a thing. I think that's a kind of way that people learn how to manage their lives. And
well, let me take it from a different standpoint then. My wife, not to disclose more information, is about to give, is about to give birth
yeah.
any day now.
Exciting.
And that goes back to what we talked in a previous episode about having to want to be able to have it all as a woman. You want to be able to have the career. You want to be able to have a family, have a husband, have a partner in life, to be able to be successful and to be able to do it the way you want to do it on your terms. But that's a tremendous amount of sacrifice, tremendous amount of dedication, discipline, and the laissez-faire attitude I don't think fits into that model. I could be wrong.
Yeah, now I'm seeing a little bit more of what you're getting at. Because at first I was thinking, oh gosh, I wish I planned. I would have a much better IRA.
Right.
Because I have a hard time planning in
Sure.
those ways. But when you're thinking about that, yeah, I do think that biology forces women in some way to plan their lives out a little bit more.
Right.
Particularly if they want to have a career and children.
Yeah.
Because you can't be like, oh yeah, I guess when I'm 45 I'll figure that piece of it out. Because
Right.
it's probably too late or it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a different story than maybe what you had envisioned.
Right. And I think in that way there's a little bit part, as you guys talked about earlier, that is nature, that you just can't control.
Well, it's not so much this nature as you can't deny biology.
Right.
You can't, I mean, I guess that maybe that's what you're saying. Is
Yeah.
I don't think that nature, that like the urge is making you do it. I think it's just the reality is you have a certain amount of eggs when you're a fetus. By the time you're born, a bunch of
Right.
them have already deteriorated.
That's right.
By the time you're 43, they're mainly gone. You know, so
Right.
like that's not your time to start thinking about these things.
Right.
And that's just the reality of science.
Is it? And do you think that allows women to be more self-aware, whereas men?
Well, I think women have to be more self-aware, or they're going to be very
Absolutely.
sad and disappointed.
Right.
If they thought, I mean, that's very interesting the way you bring this up, because in the 80s, for second wave feminists, so I'm a third wave feminist.
Sure.
For second wave feminists, there was this idea of like, there had been this imperative that of course you were going to have a baby the minute you were
Right.
20 or whatever, and then that was taken away, and you could do anything. Do not even be worrying about that. But in a way, minimizing the fact that you actually do have to plan for anything in your life. Like
Right.
feminism isn't going to hand you anything.
Right.
And no one is. You really do have to make these things happen yourself.
Yeah.
But feminism was changing the world so that you weren't only going to be valued if you had a child.
Right.
There was a profound misunderstanding for a lot of women where they were really, really surprised when they reached a certain age and realized they weren't totally fulfilled or felt lonely or whatever, and that it wasn't going to be easy to have a family.
Right.
And I think
think
that,
just fall on the ground, sorry.
there is this, one of the benefits of feminism and the progress that we've made around gender roles and all of that has been that girls and women have a whole lot more choices than they used to, and guys, not so much. They're still kind of supposed to bring home the bacon.
Right.
Yes, there are some stay-at-home dads, and yes, I think a third of two-earner families, the woman makes more than the man, but still the guys didn't get as broad a spectrum of choices in that progression that women have.
So this is a great point, and allows me to segue into our final topic of the issue of female students facing in regards to their financial future. Now, I quote, "In 2010, the Bureau of Labor Statistics affirmed the statement showing that women earned an average of 81 cents for every dollar their male counterparts did. Considering that women not only borrow the equal thousands of dollars in student loans that men do, the average female U.S. college graduate is paid less than a man with the same education on top of that." First and foremost, Jennifer, I'd love to know your thoughts. What was it like paying off college? What was that from an emotional standpoint, having to deal with that? And did you struggle with trying to find a well-paying job versus finding your passion, which may not necessarily be the same thing?
No.
Great answer.
So first of all, my parents, my whole childhood was them saving for us, for
Okay.
me 3 daughters to go to college. And
Sure.
so my college was paid for, and I
Okay.
didn't emerge with debt.
Okay.
So I was very fortunate. That said, I didn't come from a family, we didn't get allowance or, there wasn't money given to us
Right.
beyond that. And so the minute I was done with college, I was expected to pay for my apartment,
Sure.
and so I had to work, and that's fine and normal. And so I guess I was enormously lucky that I didn't have those kinds of debts. And I moved to New York City where you really can kind of get it together.
Right.
And so I worked as a waitress at night, and I had this job at Ms. Magazine during the day, and I feel like I made more money than I do now, like because there was this cash system. And so it kind of worked out, and I always felt like my work was meaningful. That said, I think student debt is enormously prohibitive. And then the other, thing that is ends up being the wage gap is the maternal wage gap, which we talked about earlier. And that's the main reason women make less than men in every field, across every field. Not just because they take time off to raise kids, but also because there's enormous prejudice against women who leave the workforce, and enormous prejudice against giving any sort of accommodation for a pregnant woman or a recently parenting woman.
Okay.
We'll see if this happens to your family.
We're going to find out real soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael, on the same vein, working at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, Start Here, Go Anywhere is the logo, and that was not a shameless plug, but it was to actually say this is an academic institution where we try to take away the issue of monetary aspects of education. How much of an empowering force could that be if we started to really try to make change on Capitol Hill to make education more of a right versus a privilege? And what type of immediate impact would that have for that gender inequality that we're still seeing today?
Lord, you need somebody smarter than me to figure that out. Everybody loves education. Everybody thinks they know what education is because everybody's been to school. Clearly, there are institutions that do a wonderful job of educating all of their students, or most of their students, and others that fail miserably at it. And it's not just an investment of money, but will, political will, social will. I mean, it's a huge, huge issue. So many politicians run on an education platform promising that they'll do more, and I was appalled when my kids were in New York public schools and my son was struggling with learning disabilities, and I saw that fewer than 50% of students graduated from high school in 4 years. I went, why aren't we demonstrating in the streets over this? And, found it wasn't so uncommon in other cities. But I don't know the answer. I mean, yes, certainly more investment in education. And we know an awful lot about how to do it well. I don't know why we're not doing it well everywhere.
Maybe from your standpoint, Jennifer, you're affiliated with the CUNY system, but you do have a little bit of a separation as an independent writer, independent force in the feminist movement, and of course, most importantly, as someone who's been on both sides of this academic question. What can we do a better job of from the standpoint of financial future being secured for females?
Well, I mean, at the risk of making it sound like this is an ad for CUNY, I think CUNY is a really important model, and I think particularly community colleges are an important model for affordable, high-level education. There are so many other things that can corrupt an education in college, but it's probably one of the most important factors in terms of guaranteeing a middle-class existence. Okay. And I mean that in the non-pejorative way, like having health insurance and things like that.
Right.
And so it's very important. It might be going away in some way, but it's not for a long, long, long time. It's still a really important experience and safety net for our culture.
So as a parting question for both of you, from an academic and professional standpoint, is it really a battle of the sexes, or is it more important for every student, be it male or female, to compete with themselves?
I don't think men and women compete with each other well, I don't know. I don't see that so much. Yes, you should compete with yourself, I suppose, but whatever the battle of the sexes is going on, it's very submerged. I think it's not an overt.
Yeah. I don't think it's a battle of one sex against the other. I think it's a battle for understanding. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be cared for, to hold closely, respectfully. With love.
But is there a sense of a lack of appreciation for what makes us different? If I'm a male student entering college between the ages of 18 and 22, should there not be a little bit more respect for my female colleagues from what they're going through? Because then that'll reflect on how I conduct myself.
I think there can be a real misunderstanding or misuse. Like a lot of students have their first using the vocabulary of feminism in their first feminist conversations when they go to college.
Right.
Like they get those words for the first time, even though they've seen the dynamics forever. Yeah. And I think sometimes it can be unduly polarizing, as opposed to an opportunity to really think about how we're connected and how we how we interrelate. So I guess I do see that kind of battle of the sexes of men feeling sort of blamed for something or sort of painted all with the same brush, and women feeling demeaned or diminished.
Sure.
So.
Michael, Jennifer, thank you so much once again. You guys have been absolutely great, and we definitely we appreciate and respect your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On that note, that'll wrap up our show for today. I'd like to once again thank our guests for their time and their unique perspectives. If you like what you saw in this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you'd like to get in touch with me to provide your comments or feedback, feel free to email me or send me a Twitter message. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. And remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.